So it is Tuesday the 29th. This is class number 5. We have a lot of ground to cover. We're going to be talking today about learning how to do stuff online, a little bit about deer ecology, as well as the way that you are going to find public land to hunt on or an area to go hunting. So really quickly, we do this every time because I'm not sure who's online and who is not, who has attended a previous session or who has not. We're going to go over who we are. We're going to have a little bit of housekeeping. We're going to go over the topics that we're discussing today: deer ecology, habitat use, online scouting, and identifying public lands. And then we're going to hit some questions and answers. Our goal, as always, is for you to learn about deer hunting, the rules and best practices to participate in a safe and ethical deer hunt this fall. And my name, as always, is James Burnham. I am the Hunting and Angling Recruitment, Retention, and Reactivation Coordinator for the state of Minnesota. Craig, why don't you tell the nice people who you are? Oh, you're muted, buddy. There we go. I got you.
Craig Kiger, Shooting Sports Coordinator for Minnesota DNR.
Ben, our special guest today is Ben Pena, and I'm going to brag a little bit about Ben. Ben is our mentor extraordinaire. Ben is a truly selfless volunteer. He dedicates so much time to what we've done in the past. He is a tremendous resource. He's taught so many people how to do this stuff, and we as Minnesota DNR are truly fortunate that we have been involved in what we do because we couldn't do it without him. So Ben, why don't you tell folks who you are?
Good afternoon. My name is Ben Pena. I'm a full-time firefighter for the city of Minneapolis, and then I mentor for the DNR. And I've been participating with the Learn to Deer Hunt since its inception, and I truly enjoy assisting everybody getting out safely to the hunting fields.
Ben, what's a little bit about your hunting story? How long have you been doing this? How did you come to it?
I've actually been hunting my whole life. My mom got me into it as a very young child, and she wanted me to have some time at peace and to know where our food was, and it was a good way to spend some quality time and stay out of trouble that she could kind of control.
Nice. And one of the things that folks will notice is as we move forward in this webinar series, it was really important for me that we had new voices at the front of the webinar. And as we move down into the application and how you actually get down in the nuts and bolts of doing this on the ground, we're going to transition to some more experienced voices as we move forward. So Ben is really our first voice as a guest speaker of, somebody who's been hunting their whole lives. Before now, we've had people that have come to it as adults or have just started. So that is by design, that we kind of want to transition to those more experienced voices so that we can get y'all the information that you need to know moving forward. All right. Thank you very much for that introduction, Ben. Really quick housekeeping notes. This webinar, it's an overview of what's required. It's a summary of the deer ecology and hunting history in Minnesota. It's an opportunity for the participants to hear the variety of voices that we have that are out there doing this stuff. It's a chance for you to ask questions about deer hunting. Yet again, I will stress that, this is one of the few times that we have Ben available to us. Ben is going to be helping us with a later webinar as we get closer to the end of the series, but really kind of hit those guest speakers with your questions because Craig and I are always here. We're always going to be around to answer questions. This is a shortcut to help you get on the right path to doing this stuff. It is not a substitute for spending time in the field or time at the range. It's really one of the few things that we can't do in this format is get you out into the field on the ground or sit next to you as you work with that firearm or bow to become comfortable with the method of take that you're going to use to harvest an animal. So you really need, that's the stuff that you need to do to really get up to speed to make sure that you can have a safe and ethical hunt in the fall, that we just can't do it. Please, please, please take the chance to fill out our survey at the end of this event. We can't force you to do it, but if you do it, it really helps us learn where our gaps are. Are we getting the stuff done? Are you getting the information that you need? And gives you a chance to provide feedback for us moving forward. So really quickly, I want to go into the meat and potatoes of what today is about. Our first topic is deer ecology. And this is kind of a revamp of our second class where we talked a little bit about biology, but ecology is a little bit of a broader perspective with this stuff. But if we recall from that second class, prior to European settlement, deer were really kind of restricted and limited in their distribution across Minnesota. They really liked that transition zone of that eastern broadleaf forest area going down into southwest Minnesota. So kind of that diagonal halfway mark across the state. They weren't all that present in the big woods up north. And that's because deer they're generalists. They really like a patchy framework, a patchwork of habitats that they can hop in between. They're really good at exploiting a wide variety of resources. And once you get into those big woods, especially prior to the cutover, those big woods, they were very monotypic. Like there was one kind of habitat type, and it was very prevalent across that northeastern third of the state. And it was a little too monotypic for deer. It was a little too homogeneous. It was a little too big foresty. There weren't enough patches for them to really get in there and exploit. And so moose and caribou were really the occupiers of that area. There are three major drivers of the distribution of deer. And again, this is a refresher from our second class. The one major driver is that habitat, and habitat is basically food, shelter, and water. Where are they eating? Where are they sleeping? Where are they drinking? And again, because they're generalists, because they really like a variety of patches of habitat, they really hone in on that transition zone between the big woods and the prairies, and that is typically dominated by the eastern broadleaf deciduous forest. Another major component that drives deer distribution is winter severity, like how bad the winters are. Up here in Minnesota, that's a big factor on where deer are located in the state, and this is something that changes through time. Last year's winter wasn't so bad for most of the state. There was a little bit of area up in the northeastern Arrowhead region of the state that got a little severe, but the vast majority of the state had a fairly mild winter compared to previous years. And that's good for the deer, because if that winter severity is really high, that's going to lead to higher mortality for deer. They can't survive the winter. They can't get to the food that they need, and that's bad for hunting the following year. The other major component of deer distribution is the predators, and that by far and away humans are the biggest predators of deer. But depending on where you're at in the state and the kind of habitats that are around you, other big predators could be black bears, it could be coyotes, it could be lynx, it could be wolves. A lot of the mortality studies that have been done both in Minnesota and in Wisconsin have shown that black bears are much more prevalent in the northern woods for causing fawn mortality, so young deer mortality, than anything else. But in other parts of the state where there's a lot of agriculture, coyotes can take over that role. So it really depends on the state of where you're at in the state, and then it depends on what's there feeding on those deer. So getting into some new information, deer have home ranges and they disperse from those home ranges. Now, a home range, really quickly, is it's where an individual consistently spends most of its time. Now, it may stray out of that home range and come back, and home ranges can be measured in a variety of different ways. But for you as a new hunter, what that means to you is if you see a deer on the landscape, that deer is probably in some sort of home range, especially this time of year. Now, in the springtime, that's when some deer are dispersing, and dispersing is an individual leaving its birth spot to go to a new area. And that typically happens in the spring, early summer. So by this time of year, if you're seeing deer that are hanging around and they're consistently hanging around, it's probably the same deer. You're probably seeing it in part of its home range or adjacent to that home range. And why that is important is because that allows you as a hunter to say, okay, well, I know it's in this area, and I can expect that it's going to kind of hang around. It's not like they're just roaming aimlessly across the landscape. They find a spot that's got the resources that they need, that food, that shelter, that water. It's safe from predators, and they kind of hunker down. And they may move within that home range, but they're gonna be kind of in that immediate vicinity. There's been a study going on in southeastern Minnesota that is looking at how deer disperse away from those home ranges. And some of the findings that they've come up with have been pretty interesting. They've shown that about half of all of the deer that they've marked are leaving to go somewhere else. That the young deer are typically leaving between April and July. And on average, their dispersal isn't that great. I mean, it's 11 miles on average for both bucks and does, but there are these kind of super dispersers that can travel dozens of miles. I think so far the record has been one buck went 54 miles and one doe actually went 77 miles. And you can see in that map all the different colors there. Those are different collared deer. You can see most of them are clustered around certain areas, but you have these handfuls that are just kind of wandering off into the world and going far afield. And you can also see the path that they take as they go far afield. And Craig is absolutely right. When he first looked at this, Craig, what did you say about it?
All those squiggly little lines are watersheds. So those deer are following the creeks or rivers that flow in and out of that area. It's green, it's cool, source of water, so that's why they're living in that area.
And that's a good thing to be looking for, and we'll talk about this as we get into what you need to look for on the landscape. But yeah, watersheds make a terrific highway for animals to move, and that's one of the reasons why the metro has such abundant resources so close. We've got a lot of rivers that are coming in, a lot of big rivers, and we have a lot of animals that are just roaming around the metro area. I mean, there are deer in my neighborhood, and I'm a mile from smack dab downtown St. Paul. I've got deer and turkey in my neighborhood, and I expect that they're using those river corridors to move around without too much disturbance. The conventional wisdom with dispersal is that it's only the bucks that leave. You know, the whole thing is that there's a family unit and a buck is born, and as they're in that home range is occupied by a bigger mature buck, and that bigger mature buck chases them out, and that probably happens sometimes. But that conventional wisdom discounts the fact that does also will disperse and leave an area and try to go find a new home range. So, you know, what does this mean for you? Again, if you're out and you're seeing a deer on the land right now, chances are it's probably already in a spot that it likes. So you know you're in a good spot. And what that means in the spring and early summer is that's when you're going to see those young deer that have been kicked out, and they're out roaming around looking for a new place to call home. So what are they looking for as they do this dispersal? They're looking for foraging areas. So again, food, shelter, water. They're looking for foraging areas. So agriculture fields are a great foraging area. We love to eat corn. Our domestic livestock love to eat corn. Our wildlife love to eat corn. They're looking for oak forests. Oaks are a tremendous source of calories. They're a tremendous source of shelter. They can be a great place to get acorns in the fall. This year, it's looking like a terrific acorn year for oaks in southern Minnesota. Craig, you mentioned that up there you've got acorns dropping like crazy where you're at too, correct?
They just started dropping about a week ago up here, and the ground is literally covered on one of my properties with lots and lots of acorns. And it's in a rural residential area, and those deer will clean those things up at night. They'll move into that feed within 10, 20 feet of the house and pick up all those acorns that have dropped. So they'll find them, you know, and take care of them and use them for what they need to.
Ben, have you been out in the woods? Are you seeing any big acorn drop areas?
I have been out in the woods quite a bit, and the area that I've been going to has quite a few acorns, and I'm not sure if the deer are eating them or the bears.
Yep.
So there's a ton of acorns out there. There's a ton of feed this year.
Yeah. And that can be a double-edged sword. It can be a great thing for the animals to have, but when there's a whole lot of food on the landscape, that can restrict how tightly they get funneled into areas to feed. You know, if everything's a salad buffet, they don't necessarily have to go to one spot. They can move to the next ridge over and be just fine. So It's kind of a double-edged sword. It's great to see a good acorn year because it opens up a whole lot of opportunities, but it's also bad because it opens up a whole lot of opportunities. Like the deer can go pretty much wherever they want. So oak forests are great. Up north, cedar and aspen stands are tremendous. And Craig, can you speak just really quickly about the benefit of those? Craig, did we lose Craig?
Nope, here I am. That mute button. So the oaks dropping the acorns, that's a food source, but the cedar and aspen are a late winter food source that the deer really depend on. Those young tender buds make great browse for deer and rough grouse, and they will utilize that tremendously. So that's a really important food source for us.
Nice. So those are kind of the foraging areas that you want to be looking for. So that's what deer are looking for on the landscape. It gives you a chance to say, you don't have to look all over Minnesota. You can find areas that have good oaks. You can find areas that have good cedar and aspen stands. You can find areas that have good agriculture fields and hone in on where you're wanting to go because that's what the deer are looking for. In terms of bedding area, they're looking for tall grasses. They're looking for open forests. They're looking for windfalls or log area slash. So slash is the piles of small trees and brush and shrubbery that the loggers don't need, so they just pile it up. Deer love those to provide a break from wind. They love them because when loggers cut down trees, the trees will hit the ground and all of a sudden there's new fresh browse to get to. You can go into some forests and you will see a line going about 6 to 8 feet off the ground, and it looks like somebody just came through with cutters and cut all the greenery off the bottom of that line, and that's deer browse. That's the browse line. So you can tell where the deer are hitting that area really hard. So when a tree gets cut down, all of a sudden they've got new browse to get into and nibble on the tops of. And Craig, you were telling me that there's deer up there that are attracted to the sounds of chainsaws in the North Woods.
In the wintertime when the loggers are out there working, when those trees fall to the ground, the deer in some of those treetops feed on those browse and buds that are now available because they were 30, 40 feet up in the air before. The loggers are out there with their heavy equipment and they're running their chainsaw, and the deer are standing literally feet away because they're not afraid of those loggers. They know that food source is going to be right there.
Right. So there's some areas where a chainsaw is a dinner bell for a deer. Also look for travel areas. So we talked a little bit about already, but those river corridors, those water edges, deer will hug those areas and use them to get from one place to another. Where there's topography in the southeastern part of the state and in some isolated areas around the rest of the state, they're looking for easy slopes. They're not mountain goats. They're not going to go up a straight cliff face. They're going to want a gentler transition in elevation, and that allows you to hone in on specific areas because you know that that's where they're going to be traveling, going from those bedding areas to those foraging areas. Why is this important? Why does it matter what a deer eats or where a deer goes or how a deer moves? And it's because hunters are ecologists. A lot of them won't call themselves that, but ecology is studying how an organism relates to their physical environment. And if you want to quickly harvest an animal, that means you've got to get close to it. Getting close means that you need to know what that animal is looking for in the land as it moves through space and time. It also helps you focus where you're going to be paying your attention. None of us have unlimited time. We are all on a clock. So having an expectation of what deer want, what deer need, lets you go to those areas and prevent you from wasting time in areas that aren't suitable. And, again, with that dispersal study, if you're seeing deer in an area, if you go out there and you're scouting around and you're kicking up a doe or kicking up a buck, odds are at this time of year, they're probably going to stick around pretty close to that area as soon as they feel that it's safe to come back to it.
Yep.
So let's transition to what are they looking for in those habitats. We're going to talk really quickly about food, shelter, and water. What a deer eats evolves through the year. In the spring and summer, they're focusing really hard on that young new plant growth. They really like shrubs like witch hazel and dogwoods, and they'll hit spring ephemerals really hard. They'll even eat poison ivy. They're one of the few animals that enjoy eating poison ivy off the ground. In the fall, that's going to shift to soft mast, and mast is just another word for food. So they're going to shift from soft mast items like fruits and berries, apples, orchards, crab apples, wild grapes, and as that stuff transitions, we're kind of in that transition period now where the apples are falling, the grapes are already done in a lot of areas, and they're transitioning more to the hard mass, which is going to be those acorns and nuts as they move through the winter. And in the winter, they're going to subsist on woody browse like evergreens. They love white cedar. They love white pine, or even lichens. They'll if in a pinch, they'll eat lichens, and they'll dig through snow to get to whatever they can get to that's still on the ground. Why is this important? Because what a deer eats affects how it tastes. Those deer that live in agriculture areas, they tend to be milder in flavor. They're not quite so full-flavored deer. And Craig, you're up north in the North Woods. You know what those North Woods deer taste like, so I'll let you describe that really quick.
You know, the quality of what they're eating can change the flavor and the texture of the meat. And I happen to like the way they taste, so it doesn't really bother that much to what they've been eating on. But they can have a little bit stronger flavor. And, of course, getting closer to the rut, you get a buck that's full-blown rut, and that's going to add a taste to the meat. You'll be making a lot more sausage that year just because you need to break down those very coarse muscles.
Ben, do you find that as well? I mean, you hunt all over the state, so do you find that pattern as well?
I do. I don't really pay attention to it like Craig. I enjoy the game meat, so I try and incorporate the flavor of that animal into the fixings. You know, you only have so many pounds, so I'm not going to fuss about 30 pounds of really strong flavored venison from a buck that was out of the swamp up north versus a little doe that was corn fed.
Yep.
You know, I just adjust my meal plan for it or my recipes as best as I can, or I age it. You know.
And there are ways to deal with that. You know, soaking it in milk or buttermilk helps leach out some of that gaminess. Like Ben's saying, adjusting your recipes, heavier sauces, higher acidic sauces, marinaras, tomato-based stuff helps cut some of that stuff. Chilies, it goes really well in chilies because you've got a lot of strong flavors in that recipe, and having that gaminess actually helps contribute to the profile. All right, let's keep moving. Human-sourced foods are a tremendous source of calories for deer. Deer have done a tremendous job adapting to people and agriculture. They love industrial row crop agriculture, especially corn and soybeans. There's a lot of calories on the land in those crop types. They also love orchards or fruit trees. You know, I had a buddy who, back in Wisconsin, he had a small orchard, and you know, September rolled around, and there was a windstorm, and it knocked down a big fence next to his orchard, and everybody was like, well, when are you going to get it fixed? When are you going to get it fixed? And he kind of looked at everybody, and he goes, probably about a week after the archery opener, because he knew that was just going to be a funnel for deer coming in, and you know, it may not be the most ethical answer, but that was his response. Deer will graze on garden plants like no other. You know, my grandmother's always chasing them out of her hosta patches or other ornamentals, and they will empty a bird feeder if you give them half a chance. So again, this speaks to the generalist nature of their habitat and food types. You know, you can use that to exploit that to your advantage. Craig, you use food plots up north where you're at on your private land, so you planted trees specifically for that purpose, correct?
Correct. I've got a number of food plots that have a variety of things that deer like to eat, from clovers to alfalfa, turnips, rape. When it freezes, the sugars come up in the green leafy parts of the plants, and the deer really like those. I I even plant a little bit of corn intermixed, and it's amazing. You get one corn stalk growing out in the middle of a food plot, and the deer will walk out and they'll stand behind that stalk of corn. It's like, oh, you can't see me. And they use it for cover. I've planted a small apple orchard with about, I think there's 20 trees out there. At the end of the year, the greenhouses are trying to get rid of those fruit trees, so I've picked some up on sale, and you got to protect them with snow fencing or tree tubes so that the deer don't browse them too heavily. But I've also planted some acorns and hickory. Those heavy mass trees, they're not for me. That's going to be 20, 30 years down the line. So that next generation of hunters that come and get to hunt this property, they're going to benefit from having those food sources there.
Nice. So what does this mean for you? Keep an eye on agriculture fields near where you might hunt. If those crops are still standing, especially with corn, those deer don't need to go anywhere. They've got shelter from the wind sitting in the middle of those corn rows. They've got food all around them. They're safe from harassment or predators. So, they just kind of hunker down in those fields. And, I was hunting with a buddy on his grandfather's property in southwestern Wisconsin, and, sat down with a grandmother, and she was telling stories about the old days, and just, I got kind of a little overly romantic about it, and I was like, what was it like when you guys went deer hunting when you were a girl? And she was like, oh, we just walked down the corn rows and shot them in the field. And it wasn't the most poetic method, but I'm sure it was effective. So they really hunker down in those spots. So keep an eye on them. Keep an eye on those fields. I know as soon as I see corn going down, my mind is sitting there going, okay, the deer are going to start moving now, because A, the wind shelter is taken away from them. B, they've had machinery in there that chase them all out of the field. So I definitely keep an eye on the agriculture near where I hunt. All right. So for water, yeah, go ahead, Ben.
Oh, just a quick touch base. If you're lucky enough to get permission to hunt someone's agricultural fields, my personal favorite time to actually hunt, say, like a standing corn, is the windiest, stormiest, nastiest day out there, because you will find deer everywhere inside the standing corn, staying out of the wind, eating, and not paying attention, and it gives you a lot of opportunities to get in close.
Nice. Good tip. So moving on so we talked a little bit about food, wild foods, human-sourced foods. Let's talk about water. They need to drink. Deer have to drink water. Use that to inform where you're going to go, especially if it's a warm day, especially if it's early bow season and it's hot and you're in your shirt sleeves. Hone in on those water sources, because they're going to be hitting those pretty hard. Big water is typically a barrier. Deer, they can swim. They don't like to do it. They prefer to run. So if there's big water near you, that's going to act as a barrier. It's going to kind of funnel them into a specific spot. You can use that to help predict where they're going to be. River corridors, again, they can be tremendous travel areas. They can be deer highways, and anybody that goes in along the river, you can see game trails all over the place, because they're going to be following that river wherever it's going. And another tip with water is that it's not just a barrier for deer; it can be a barrier for people too. So if you're hunting on a public land area, or even a private land area, and there are other hunters there, if you've got a canoe or a kayak, I'd probably use a canoe, because putting a deer on a kayak is kind of that's an advanced maneuver. I wouldn't advise it for beginning hunters, but a canoe, if you can get a canoe going and get across that water, it might open up an entirely new area that just people can't get to otherwise. So, look at water as a feature of the landscape that not only controls how deer are moving, but it's also controlling how hunters are moving. And the other nice thing about river and water areas, even if it's been dry for a couple of weeks, that's where you're going to have soft habitat. You're going to have mud. It gives you a chance to see where deer tracks are, where they may be crossing that feature, and that gives you a really good indication of where you could set up to possibly take a deer. So habitats to look for in southern Minnesota. This is a lot more familiar ground for me, so I'm going to take this one. I look for a good mix of habitats. I look for spots with oaks. I look for spots with adjacent agriculture. I look for spots with evergreens because for me, in the southern part of the state, those evergreens are going to be shelter areas. That's where they can bed down, and it's nice. The wind is it's always going to be a wind buffer, and I find a spot that's got water nearby. So I look for a patchwork of all of those items in one area. I also like to use topography. I like to start high. If there's ridge lines that are around there, I start high on the ridges because for one, as the day goes on and the sun is heating that land, even in the winter, it's going to create a thermal coming upslope. So it's going to naturally take my scent away from the downslope area and take it over the high ground. So if I'm expecting deer to be coming up from a certain area, I really want to start high. It also, I don't want to drag a deer uphill if I can avoid it. So, I'd much rather drag downhill than uphill. And it lets me it gives me a better view. It lets me cherry pick where those easy transitions between elevations occur. Ben, does that fit with how you do it, or do you have other tips?
Well, I usually, if I'm going public land, I usually try and find the biggest parcel that I can find that offers an opportunity to stay on site. So I try and camp and do an extended hunt, and then I get as far back via water or hiking or both away from people. Then I look for the breaks and the transitions and exactly what you're talking about. And then I look for sign, so either browse sign or trails. And it's something that I've built up over the years. I've hunted one spot for over 15 years and have had a lot of luck finding deer. I haven't ever harvested one out of that area.
Okay. Okay. Awesome. And Craig, I'm going to turn it over. You're our Northwoods guru, so I'm going to turn it over to you for what you look for in northern Minnesota.
So up here, I try to find the edges, and it could be a field and a forest edge. You're going to find a lot of sign tracks, trails, rubs, scrapes right on the edge of that field. If it's a field that they're actively feeding in, that might be a really good spot to set up. Walking the edge of a swamp or a lowland area and a forest edge. Now, the picture here, I told James, I said that spruce and tamarack back there may be too wet, so you might have to go back a little bit further and find where the rises a little bit to more solid ground. But that's also another really good area because they're going to use that really thick balsam spruce as an area to get out of the wind and get some winter thermal cover from that as well. The aspen logging sites up here, they generate lots of edges. They normally try not to set up square timber sails, but they'll follow the edges. And the whitetail is a creature of the edge. And so even if it was cut maybe a year or two before, they're still going to be out there feeding on those tender browse. And if you're lucky enough to find one that they're actively logging in, that's like ringing the dinner bell come the muzzleloader season primarily. When those trees fall, the deer don't have to work very hard. They just walk out of the big timber and feed on the tops. But focus on those field edges early season because that's going to give you a lot of information. The bucks are going to leave scrapes and rubs where, this is my calling card. The mid-season, look for those timber transitions. And usually by mid-season, we have some snow on the ground up here. And you can find those trails really easy, how to get, where the deer are going. And I try to position myself between a really thick bedding area and where they might be traveling for feeding. And in that late season, I focus primarily on logging cuts because they'll be out there on a good, warm, sunny day, feeding heavily on that browse. On an older timber sale, if you're hunting with a partner, try to position them in a position and you just walk the edges of that sail all the way around and you're pushing deer ahead of you, hopefully that'll run by your hunting partner. It's kind of a one-person mini drive, if you will, that can get the deer up and moving and hopefully they move in that direction.
Nice. All right. So that kind of gives folks an idea of, what landscape features the deer are looking for, how they're using them, and how we use them to get closer to the animals. And now I want to transition into how do you find those features without just driving randomly across the entire state. So I'm going to transition to online scouting. Now, the stuff that Craig and Ben have, they've dropped hints about the sign that deer are leaving. That's coming up in next class. We're going to talk about what that looks like in the field, so that once you get to an area, you can start honing in on those sign items and really focus in on finding a specific spot. But right now, this is all about getting that first general area. I don't know where to go. I don't know what to look for. This class is to try to find you that spot so that you can then go and look for that sign that we're going to cover next class on Thursday. We live in the golden age of information. Not only do we live in the golden age of deer, there's more deer in the land than's been here in 150 years at a population level. That's not everywhere in the state, but in terms of the statewide population, there's a lot of deer that are here. We live in the golden age of information, and there's so much spatial data that's out there, it's silly. There's just a lot of stuff that can help you save time to prevent you from having to go out and just randomly search for stuff. It lets you look in an area without driving all over the place. It gives you an idea of what's happening beyond the borders of where you're specifically at, and that's important because if there's a big logging operation that's just off the property, or if there's a big agriculture operation that's just off the property, that's useful information to you to have, and you may not see it if you don't go in the right way. It can also give you a history of that land, and that's also important because that lets you hone in on where the old trees are, because the old trees, especially if they're in the broadleaf area, the old trees are going to have the most food. They're going to be dropping the most acorns or nuts or mast, and that's a good place to start. If you don't know where else to start where the old trees are at, because they're probably producing the most food. The trade-off with this, the con is that, those are all the pros. The con is that you may not necessarily be able to easily interpret what you're looking at. So the screenshot that you see in front of you, this is part of the Rum River State Forest up north of the metro, just south of Lake Mille Lacs. And we're going to walk through identifying what those areas are and how we would choose to set up on this parcel if this was where we decided to go. If you're in the North Metro and you have no idea where to go, the Rum River State Forest, it's a good patch of land. It's got enough area that you can get in there and set up an extended deer camp tent, just like Ben was talking about. But you still need to pick a spot to get a deer, 100 yards in front of you. So let's walk through how we're going to do that. What do you use? You've got options to use this stuff. There's free stuff that's out there. Online maps with Google and Bing, they're everywhere. They provide driving directions. You can, even if you don't know the address of a place, you can put in the coordinates. You can just copy and paste coordinates and put them in, and they'll take you right there. Google Earth is a slightly different application. It gives you historical imagery data for a place. So it's a little bit more versatile than Google Maps, but it doesn't quite do the same thing. The Minnesota Department of Natural Resources has what we call a Recreation Compass, which is a online mapping tool that has all the stuff that you need, and we'll get into it in just a second. And then there's multiple subscription services. There's multiple brands that are out there. And what they do is they combine, for the most part, it's all freely publicly available data anyway, but they just combine it all in one place. So you get landowner information, you get hunting information, you get topography information. And it's when you pay for those services, it's more of a convenience fee that they've compiled all this information into one spot, and usually it's a very slick graphical interface, and then you don't have to go digging through online plat maps to find this information. They also can turn your phone into a GPS unit and allow you to easily share tracks and points or areas with others. And if this is something that you're serious about, or you feel like you're getting serious about it, a lot of hunters use these subscription services because they do provide a lot of great information, and they are very useful. So how do we use it? Well, let's start with where we think we're going to hunt. So we've picked our spot, the Rum River State Forest. So we're going to look for features that we think deer might want to use. So I'm looking for agriculture, I'm looking for shelter, so dense forest areas, and then I'm looking for how features on the land are going to affect the way deer move across that land. So because what I'm looking for are concentrate, where do deer get concentrated? Because when they get concentrated, that means if I set up on that spot, I have more chance to seeing them come by. So those are pinch points, those are edge areas, those are funnels, topography, and water. So let's look for agriculture. So agriculture, crop fields typically have square corners. They can show up as bare soil. They'll be plowed in the winter and early spring. So, looking at this imagery in that bottom left, that's a plowed field right next to a field that's recently sprouted. So if I was going to be a betting man, I'd say that was winter wheat that somebody's planted for green fertilizer. But the other thing that I'm looking at here is that I'm looking at the old field that's immediately to the right of that, because you can still see that right angle cut. And that old field is I like that there's an old field there because there's going to be tall grasses in there that could be bedding areas. I want to get out there and see what that looks like. Looking for shelter. We're looking for those dense stands of trees. And here we've got an island that's in a marsh that has no roads going by it, so the deer aren't going to be harassed by cars, and there's no houses nearby, so they're not going to be harassed by people or dogs. And it's a little isolated from predators. So, getting across that marsh, somebody's got to really work to get out there, and the deer know that. So I'm expecting that to be a good shelter area. I can see that there are some really dense dark green areas on that island. I expect those to be evergreens or conifers of some sort, and I'm going to expect that those are going to be still green in the winter, so that's going to be good shelter for the winter. So now I have an expectation of where they're staying. They're staying on that island, and I have an expectation of where they're feeding. They're feeding in that crop field and that old field. And so now I have to decide, how do I intercept the deer going from the bedding area to the feeding area? And I'm going to be looking for pinch points and funnels. And pinch points are spots where habitat narrows before opening up again. Deer like to feed in ag fields. They don't necessarily like to roam around in the open in them. So they kind of hug the woods, and then they're going to pop out and get in the ag field. So a pinch point in this imagery is kind of where there's this constriction between the wetland and that old field that kind of narrows down where the deer are going to be traveling through. And I'm going to want to check out that area, because if I can see a good deer trail, or if I can see scrapes or rubs along that trail, which are deer sign, that's a good indication that it's being used. A funnel is an area where habitat narrows down to a point or a narrow opening. And this imagery has a great funnel in it. It's right here. You can see how it kind of tapers down to a confined area, and that's going to concentrate deer movement as well. Now, why is that? Why do I feel good about that? Because you can actually see deer trails in the wetland in this imagery, and you can see that they're taking the shortest distance between that island and the surrounding areas, and that tells me that deer are moving through there pretty good. So I really want to hit that funnel. I want to see where the trails are coming in from that island and going down towards the field, and give me a chance to set up. For topography, deer tend to, like I said, they're not mountain goats. They don't want to scale sheer cliffs. So when you're looking at a topographic map, when you see those lines stacked really tightly next to each other, that is a steep slope. And deer are not going to want to use that because it's a lot of effort. And deer are all about maintaining economy of effort. They want to maintain that energy so that they're not burning energy that they don't have to burn, so that they can do other things like chase does or fight bucks or roam around and just sit there and be lazy. So I know I'm not going to be looking in those areas, and I don't want to walk those areas or drag a deer up them or down them. So instead, I'm going to be looking for gullies. I'm going to be looking for gentler slopes, and here you can see that in these areas that look like folds into the lines. Those are going to be gentler slopes. Those are going to be easier transitions, and I'm going to expect the deer to be moving through those. If they're going high to low, they're going to try to take the gentler slope. If they're going from one high point to another point, they're going to cut across on saddles and use the contour lines. So I'm going to really try to look for how are they moving across the landscape and use that topography to my advantage. You really need to use all the tools at your disposal. So, using online imagery, digitally scouting, it is not a substitute for going out there and seeing what's happening. It does not replace you spending time on the ground to investigate this stuff. Go and check to make sure that what you're seeing is actually happening and that how you're interpreting it is accurate. practice on places that you're familiar with. This can be your backyard, it can be the local park, it can be the natural area that's closest to you that you're most familiar with. Practice on areas that you're familiar with so that you can get a feel for what that imagery looks like on screen versus what it looks like in person. The more you do it, the more you'll get a feel for what this stuff looks like, how it actually looks, and what it means. This image is from where we do our hunt at Minnesota Valley National Wildlife Refuge. I was interested in this spot because there's that, you could see that there's forest with a mowed patch through it. That is a power line right away, so they cut down all the trees, so it's just an open field. I like that because it's an edge, and that means that deer are probably going to be working that edge as they move through that landscape. I also wasn't sure what that dark little point was sticking up from the tree line. I couldn't tell if it was a shadow from a tree or if it was a water feature. So I go out there and I see that it's actually a water feature that goes about halfway across that mowed field. And if you look from the front of the picture on the right towards the back, you can see that on the right side of that water, it's all green, it's all green, it's all green, and then it's really brown. And that is all deer trail that's just been cut down to cut across that little gully because that's where the water ends. So that's a pinch point where they don't want to go in the water, they want to stay on the dry ground, and there's an edge right there. I could set up a blind there or just stand there, and within a day or two, I can almost guarantee that deer are going to be walking past there. So the take home from this is get out there, take a look around, use this to inform where you're going to go look, but you still need to go look, and you still need to make sure that what you're seeing is what you think you're seeing. I want to transition really quickly through some of this. We're running a little behind. We have a tremendous amount of public lands in Minnesota. There's a lot that's out there. We have over 12 million acres. That's almost 2 acres per person here in Minnesota to do things, to go hunting, to go fishing, to just go camping or bird watching. And we're ahead of a lot of other states that are around us. How do you find these public lands? Well, you start with the Recreation Compass, and I brought this up earlier. It gives you the public and access options all across the state. You can click on a parcel, and it will take you to a detailed map or a report of that area, and you can toggle on and off the different permit areas across the state. So if you want the deer permit areas, you can turn those on. If you want turkey, you can turn those on. If you want bear, you can turn those on. It's a really tremendous resource, and if you just search for Recreation Compass, you'll find it. Using the Rec Compass is just the first step. You really need to break down and use multiple sources. So here we're back to that Minnesota Valley National Wildlife Area. I have used the Recreation Compass to identify that. That's in that top left. But then I go to Google Earth and I want to say, okay, what has happened in this land? And when you look at this, I've got imagery from 1991, 2003, and 2016. If you look in that 1991 image, and you can see the river makes kind of a hawksbill curve, kind of in the top left corner of that, there's a dark patch in that 1991. That is forest. And so that's where I know the oldest trees are going to be, because everything else around it is bare field. And like I said, the oldest trees are where I want to start looking for stuff. It's going to be historic shelter. It could be food. So that's where I'm going to hone in on using that stuff. And again, using multiple sources allows me to interpret this and get a feel for what this used to look like, because that's also going to shape how deer are moving across the land. And we've got a whole lot of resources that are available. If you just do a search for MN/DNR hunting land locations, you'll wind up at our landing page for our hunting information, and it gives you all the federal stuff, all the county stuff, all the state stuff, and a really tremendous amount of resources for you to find a spot to go in Minnesota. In addition to public lands, we have public access to private lands. This is called our walk-in access program. It is very popular in the southwestern part of the state where we don't have quite as many wildlife management areas or public areas. You do need to pay a validation fee, but once you pay that fee, it gets you into all the walk-in access areas. You can check our walk-in access atlas, and if you just do a search for walk-in access, you'll wind up at our landing page for that. So this is also a tremendous resource. This isn't public land, but if you pay that validation fee, it allows you to hunt in those areas. And just a really quick note, this is private land. Please be respectful that it is somebody's private land. Don't trash it up. Don't be a jerk. Just treat it with respect. So Ben, really quickly, can you walk us through your process of hunting on public land? Because I know you're a big public land hunter.
So what I've done is I usually start with a plot map or a prim map or the gazetteer, old school maps, and then I just use a road map also and just find, like state forest, national forest, big chunks like that, and then I pick an area that looks like an area I want to hunt, say like by McGregor or up north or down south. Then I use the different maps to find what is public hunting. I'm going to give away a spot that I've hunted, but it's very large. I hunt Moose Willow, which is just south of where Craig is. And it's big. It has a lot of water, it has a lot of public land, and it also has sustained forestry on it. So the landscape is always changing. And it has trail systems, so I can get in and out. And I look at it also has camping on site. So I don't have to go. I can just go there, bring all my stuff, set up camp, canoe in and out, hike in and out, travel back and forth. And that's kind of what I've always done. And then from there, I look at the maps, GPSs, and all those things for little edges like you're talking about, or curves in the river, and try and get to those away from everyone else and do isolated hunting and just and it's trial and error. Sometimes it works great and I get on deer, and sometimes I see nothing but car tracks, or I get stuck. You kind of have to be ready for everything. I've spent more time digging my vehicle out than I'd like to admit. So.
But the nice thing is that it's worst case scenario, it's a nice walk in the woods, right? You get out there and you get to see stuff. I mean, the hunt that we had up at St. Croix that you coordinated for us last fall in St. Croix, we had hunters that didn't see a deer, but they had wolves go by, they had bears go by. I mean, there was still plenty of stuff to look at. It's still an interesting time in the woods.
Yep, and that's my whole process. I go out with the idea and the intent to potentially harvest something, and I'm primarily a meat hunter, and anything and everything is a trophy for me because it creates memories, and hopefully they're fond memories. But exactly what you're talking about. It's a beautiful time to be out. I get my solace. I get my regeneration, and sometimes I'm lucky enough to either get a workout going in or out. But the mapping sources, I also a couple of the things that you didn't touch on. I have private accounts that I pay for, but I also have that as a safety net because I'm so far back that if something happens to me or a hunting partner, I have to have that method or a similar one because there's no other reception back there. I'm hunting in Minnesota where there's absolutely zero cell phone reception. So
that's a really great point, Ben. There are devices that are out there that they're linked to GPS units, and if there's an emergency, you can just press the help button and help will be on the way, and it doesn't require cell phone reception. So if you're hunting in an area where you don't have that cell coverage, if you're hunting in an area where you're either on your own or things could get dicey, that's a really good thing to possibly have in your kit. Awesome. So we've got about 5 more minutes on the talk. Craig, is there anything else? I think we're pretty caught up with the questions. So if there's anything that hasn't been answered, please repeat the question so that we can make sure that we've got it. If you have questions, if you have other questions, please let us know, and we'll be happy to take a look at that.
We just had one. If you want to take a look at that.
Yes.
We respect public land.
I don't.
And if you walk up on somebody, turn around and find another trail to go down and check out.
I don't know if you guys can hear me.
That's
What's going on.
Go ahead, Ben.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So there's a chat about public forests and WMAs. I don't. It's all part. I don't own private property. I've hunted in Minnesota. I've hunted in Colorado. I mean, I've always seen people. You're gonna bump into people. It's part of the big picture. Just try and give each other space and respectful, and be safe.
Yeah, I mean,
we only have.
Go ahead, Ben.
Oh, so we only have so much accessible land. So that's why, like, for me, I try and find the big ones that get as far away as possible from people. But otherwise, like, I've had great times in small little ones. I've seen deer where people have walked right ahead of me and they bumped the deer right into me.
Mhm. And one of the things about hunting public, it's there are other hunters or non-hunters that are out there. They have just as much right to be out there as you do. Be respectful of them, be respectful of their property, be respectful of their time in the woods. But also, you don't necessarily know if somebody's out there trail running, they're just as likely to spook a deer towards you as they are to spook a deer away from you. So it's just part of being out there and part of that style of hunting. And it's one of the reasons why, if I'm archery hunting on public land, if I get anything, it's a heck of a lot more impressive to me than if I'm on private land where I know there's a giant buck who, I've got him dialed in and I know at 4:30 he's going to be at this corner of the property and at 5:15 he's going to walk right past the stand. I mean, that's a different style of hunting. And so being out on public, it's a lot less predictable. It's a lot more about you putting in the time and effort. And like Ben said, if you want to hunt public land and you don't want to see somebody, walk farther than they are. Just a lot of hunters are not walking very far when they come out and they hunt on public lands, either because they just don't want to or maybe because they can't. There's a lot of folks that are mobility limited and they just can't get into those back areas. So pick a big area, pick a spot where, nobody wants to drag a deer a mile out of the woods, but, that's one of the reasons why there's nobody back there. So, you just have to be willing to go to the spots that other folks aren't going to be in. And, if you encounter somebody else, just give a heads up. If you hear an archer yell from their tree stand that you just stumbled upon them, just be like, my bad, and back out. And that's all you have to do. You don't have to have an argument with them. They were there, and you just walk somewhere else. And that's how it's done. And again, like we said in the first class, none of this is worth getting into an argument over. None of this is worth getting bent out of shape about. Just walk away, and that's just what you need to do.
Got a question here, and I think Ben might be the one to answer it, but canoes were mentioned. Any thoughts on inflatables?
There's some really, really cool inflatables out there. Just make sure it's somewhat purpose-built. Don't buy one or don't use one. Ideally, that's for the summertime for the kids in the lake. Like pack rafts or I think one name are alpacas or whichever they are. There's a couple of them that are amazing. I've looked at them myself, but I have 3 canoes. They take up a lot less room in a vehicle, so you don't have to have a monster truck and trailer to move them around. But whenever you're on water or going through water to get to a hunting area, make sure that you plan accordingly, that you have some sort of a life preserver and you have some sort of dry clothes in case you get wet, or any time that you're hunting in Minnesota where there's water or rain or snow, that you plan for that.
All right. Well, it is right at 1 o'clock. If there are other questions that people need answered, or if there's anything in the chat that we haven't addressed, We're happy to stick around for just a few more minutes, but I want to make sure that everybody has had their questions answered. If you've got somewhere to be at 1, it's 1, so go be in that spot. Thank you so much for tuning in. We're going to hang out for just a little bit longer, make sure our questions are answered, and be back on Thursday. We're going to be talking about scouting for sign in the field. So now you've got your area, you think you've got your spot. This is what you need to look for when you're out there. So thanks so much for tuning in. We really appreciate it. Ben, thank you so much for providing your comments. Stick around with us for just a little bit longer, and we'll get those questions answered. So thank you, everybody. So let's keep hitting the questions.
New question from Craig. In remote areas, can you quarter and pack out your deer as long as you keep evidence of sex attached to the quarter?
Ooh. James, you know those specifics. I think in Minnesota you have to actually now be able to register it via phone, and then once you get that registration number, you can break it down.
Correct.
You do have to keep it, I believe, also evidence of sex per the state law, which is a little specific.
Yeah. So you still have to quarter it out. Especially, and this isn't just in remote areas, this is in CWD areas. If you want to hunt in a CWD area, but you don't live there and you want to leave that deer permit area, you have to quarter it out and leave the carcass, the skull, the spinal column behind in that CWD zone. So you still need to quarter it out. You still need to maintain proof of sex. That's a good idea to have with you, but you need to register it first. And so make sure you've got a cell signal, make sure you can get to a place where you can register it, tag it, register it, and then break it down.
Nice. So we got a question from Doug. I missed how you get to the old Google Maps.
The old Google Map. Oh, to see the old maps on Google. So that's in Google Earth. Those old historic imagery is in Google Earth, and you can go up, and when you open up Google Earth, now Google Earth, you might have to download it. It's an application that will live on your computer, and when you open up the screen, you'll see a little clock you'll see a little icon of a clock with a green arrow in it, and that tells you the dates of what dates they have for the imagery for that parcel. So download Google Earth, click on the history, and you can see, the old historical imagery, and some of that may go back to black and white aerial photos, and some of it may be older satellite imagery that they've got for those coordinates.
Okay.
Right.
I think we got all of the questions that have come in so far, either electronically replied to or verbally.
Okay. Right. So if nobody else has any more questions, we're going to wrap it up. Thank you so much for spending your Tuesday lunch with us. Ben, thank you again so much for spending your time. You're going to be back with us for the second to last class, so that'll be in a little bit, and we're going to be talking gutting and getting deer out of the field. So your knowledge on that will be helpful, very much so.
It's always fun. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And again, I can't brag about Ben enough. He's a tremendous hunter. He's a tremendous volunteer. The guy, he's the hunter that I want to be when I grow up. So thank you very much, Ben. I appreciate it.
I got a lot to learn. Hey guys, well thank you. I appreciate it. If anybody has any other questions, send them to James or to me. You can find me. I'm pretty easy to find. But I do have to get back to work, so I have to jet.
Excellent.
See you guys.
Thanks so much.
Yep.
And with that, I'm going to close this down. Thanks again, everybody. We'll see you on Thursday. Have a great day. Get out in the woods. Go look for some deer sign and go test your satellite imagery interpretation skills. Go forth and do good things. Good luck, good skill. We'll see you all on Thursday. Bye now.